Are you a bit tired of playing vanilla CK3? There's only so many times that you can go from a count to an emperor before it gets a little stale, particularly when there's a consensus among fans that more content needs to be added into the game for it to become as replayable as Crusader Kings 2. Eventually, Crusader Kings 3 will get there, but for now though, in order to get a fresh new experience within Crusader Kings 3, you probably have to try out some of the mods. This brings us onto this video, and today we're going to discuss perhaps one of the most underrated mods within Crusader Kings 3. Despite this mod being updated significantly, I wouldn't particularly say it's one of the most popular mods, purely because the mod is based off a fantasy series that is less popular than Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones and Elder Scrolls. Regardless of that, in terms of effort and design, this mod is definitely up there as one of the better mods. It is called The Way of Kings, and it is based on the fantasy novels written by Brandon Sanderson. This CK3 Total Conversion mod takes you out of the world of CK3 and immerses you into this fantasy world. Without further ado therefore, let's discuss some of the good parts of this mod. So for those of you who have no idea about anything within this mod, let's talk about some basic lore so you understand a bit about the context. Released in 2010, the first book, Way of Kings, became a highly successful fantasy novel. To date, there are around 443 chapters about the Stormlight Archive fantasy series, so quite a lot of lore to read about. The fantasy world is set in a supercontinent known as Roshar. We can get a full picture of it within the CK3 map. The world is periodically assaulted by high storms, storms characterised by a very violent storm travelling from east to west. The world is unsurprisingly split into various nations, as well as races, but we don't want to get into too much detail about them, in case it completely spoils the fantasy series for you. But to sum up, it's a world based on magic, different races, interesting events and monuments. I don't think many people would play this mod purely for the lore, as it's relatively unknown, but instead, they'd play it for the mechanics within the CK3 mod. You probably don't even have to know any lore in order for you to get invested into Way of Kings. The reason that the lore is not the most critical part of the mod is because Way of Kings is more well known for the bar they set in terms of the mechanics of the game. Let's start with the most interesting mechanics that have been added into the mod. Knights Radiant is a fairly big mechanic within this Crusader Kings 3 mod. Knights Radiant are an organisation of invested warriors who fought the Voidbringers that attacked the supercontinent. Without going too much into the lore, what does the Knights Radiant allow you to do in the game? You become one by having a stress break and bonding with your very own therapy fairy. There are 10 orders of the Knights Radiant, all potentially giving you small bonuses, depending on which one you're in. The Order of the Skybreakers, for instance, gives you both movement and raiding speed, which definitely can be useful when you are fighting in an intense war. You can join one of these orders when you bond with a Spren, and this could happen when you have a stress break within the game, or you start with it. Playing with a few characters within the Knights Radiant, it definitely adds a different magical element to Crusader Kings 3. Each order as well, in the surge binding section, shares certain surges. Skybreakers and Windrunners both share the surge of gravitation. Another core addition from the bonding as well is you are able to see your Narwhal bond in the background of your 3D character portrait, again immersing yourself within the mod. Despite me knowing a very limited amount about the lore of this mod, it's relatively easy to understand this mechanic, and therefore maybe it's worth for you getting into this mod, even if you haven't read any of the books. The next mechanic I want to discuss is dungeon delving. This is a fun hunt that can be declared by the ruler of Orifule, who is in the mountains with quite an interesting 3D monument that has been created for this Crusader Kings 3 province. Dungeon delving is an event-driven decision where your choices may affect the custom Dungeon Delve combat minigame. After gaining supplies and spending quite a few gems, you can play a completely different game that looks nothing like Crusader Kings 3. This dungeon minigame is actually quite dynamic than at first look, and you need to stock up heavily on supplies and investiture, or it may be fatal as you're slaughtered by your enemies. What I also found quite interesting as well is many personality and lifestyle traits impact the potential outcome of your battle. Brave characters can taunt the enemy, while arrogant characters can waste their time boasting and leaving them vulnerable to attack. Given all the small details and content, this is perhaps one of the best mod mechanics I've seen so far that is released in Crusader Kings 3. So those are the two main unique mechanics that really makes this mod great, but there's also quite a few other things that have been added in. The marriage mechanic, for instance, has been slightly changed to suit the mod. This is because religions within roster have a courtship period to see whether the two characters get on, and both must consent to get married. While it's not completely game changing, it's a feature that again can add a bit more to your gameplay. The modders have also decided to add a mini fishing game in the decisions, although it can definitely get a bit boring after a while, and not the reason I play Crusader Kings 3. The mechanics I've mentioned, of course, are not the only mechanics, and we have some really interesting artifacts, as well as investiture, which can be used to fuel magical devices. All this is really interesting, and overall the mechanics are what makes a mod really good. Talking about the design part of the mod, you can currently play as two species, humans and singers. As of the game's start date, most singers are enslaved by humans, and are known as parshmen. The primary exception is the listeners of the Shattered Plains, led by Queen Eshone. As you play the game, the modders have taken inspiration from the storm that passes over the supercontinent, and we can see this grey murky storm pass overhead as you press play. This again makes the mod feel more immersive and interesting to play in. You also have custom men-at-arms, as well as some holdings have special models. While it's not the most insane thing we've heard in a CK3 mod, this mod, in terms of design, nonetheless meets the gold standard of CK3 mods. Unlike Crusader Kings 3 with its mainly feudal systems, the modders have really tried to create their own unique governments for the mod. Some unique government types I find particularly interesting is firstly the Phalan elective, favouring those with the ability to manage an economy. Even in today's world, something like this would be interesting for a country to implement. Another interesting government type is the Aegis elective. Anyone can submit essays, and the outcome depends on your stats and a bit of randomness. I'd say both these government types actually make inheritance in Crusader Kings 3 a lot more interesting and fun. So even without knowing any of the lore of this mod, you can still have an interesting playing experience with it. The fact that the quality of this mod is so high means it's been able to be relatively successful, and is only going to be improved in the future as it gets updated regularly. The mechanics definitely add something far more immersive than normal Crusader Kings 3, which is why this mod has over 25,000 subscribers. But I'd still say, in the grand scheme of things, this mod is fairly underrated. What do you guys think of this mod though? Would you potentially play it? Or are you put off because you aren't too sure about the lore? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye for now.
Huge shout out to our patrons, most notably Charlie Damarell, Crilly, Flyerton, JDow52, Kargon, Sjalmi, Wright, Nicoles Christ, QA Shard, Redguard, and ShadowSinger. Your support means a lot, guys. Whilst you're here, you might as well click on another video. I mean, it's literally right there.